How's it going, everyone? Thank you very much for coming out. Great to see everyone today. My name is Sam Smith. I'm a Master of Business Analytics student here at MIT Sloan, as well as the student lead for this panel, Next Frontier in Baseball Analytics. Joining us on this panel, starting here, is Dusty Baker, former player and manager in the MLB. Pat Young, the VP and software engineer at LBI Software. Brandon Taubman, Senior Director of Baseball Operations for the Houston Astros. Jerry DePoto, General Manager of the Seattle Mariners. And moderating this panel will be Brian Kenny of MLB Network. This panel is going to last 40 minutes. There's going to be about 5 minutes toward the end for Q&A. If you'd like to submit a question, please use Twitter, tweet your question along with the hashtag BaseballAnalytics, and we'll be picking a few of those for our panelists to respond to. So on that note, I'll turn it over to Brian. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody doing well? Good. All right. It's good to have you here face-to-face with Dusty. Dusty, we finally meet. Aha. It's great to be here, and it's a fantastic panel just with the backgrounds of everybody here. Again, a sitting GM right now. Again, Brandon with the defending World Series champion Astros, and again, Pat, who's at the forefront of really now the analytics and software that's available out there and that's being put out there that's really pushing things in baseball. And of course, Dusty Baker, great player and did a fantastic job with the Washington Nationals, easily winning the NL East the last 2 years. So it's great to be here with all of you. Winter reckoning, let's start there. Something changed this year. You can't blame this guy. This guy is ready to deal. Jerry, you still made transactions, but give me a sense of what you thought was happening on the free agent market with the slowdown.
With the slowdown, it appears to be, I guess, unclogging as we speak. There's the players will get paid. They were always going to get paid. It's just taken a little bit longer this offseason. And I think there were a lot of elements that contributed to the slowdown. The combination of teams that were rebuilding and restructuring, probably following the blueprint that was formed by the Astros a handful of years ago. 30 teams, I think, are roughly 30 smart teams that have a plan in mind. They have strategic plans in what they're trying to create. And we've learned a lot about free agency through the years. So teams moving a little bit slower down that road, looking to trade acquisitions, looking to development before they look to free agency isn't uncommon in today's game. And as a result, I think you saw a slower market develop.
Dusty, I want your take on that, given that you were your management, but you were labor for a long period of time. What was your view of what was going on?
Well, I wasn't really sure because I wasn't following, as closely as I was, with the Nationals. But it just appeared that, like you said, teams were restructuring. I know a lot of people were talking about, collusion, which I was involved in that in my playing days, which I hope that ugly word doesn't, rear its head here. And, I really wasn't sure. Between you and I, this is my first time being back into baseball because I lost my job in Washington, so I kind of shoved that memory in the closet until you guys brought me out of the closet. And so I'm hoping. I love baseball. It was part of my life for almost 6 decades. It will be a part of my life in the future because I have a son who's a freshman at the University of California, Berkeley. He's a second baseman, so he keeps me up on things, and perhaps I should call him and ask him what his take on this whole thing is.
Okay. Brandon, again, you were part of that baseball ops revolution. You tell us, again, what do you think is happening, confluence of forces, what's happening?
I think I agree with what Jerry said, that there are some conflating factors that resulted in a slow market this year, but I think chief among them is that you have 30 really smart people running baseball teams, and you also have ownership groups with, financial backgrounds that understand that it's the most expensive way to invest in free agency. So, you have more stringent ownership groups, you have smarter general managers, and there's a lot more due diligence that goes into making multi-million-dollar investments in free agency. So I think that that's the main reason it slowed up a bit. But what's been interesting is that some of the premium players in this year's market have received the sorts of contracts that they probably would have in past seasons as well. So for, the slow development, I think at the end of the day, the player side is still getting roughly market market deals.
Patrick, you have a take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot from the decision-making side, but from like an analysis side, I think for a number of years, people that have looked at long-term free agent contracts and the value in them, as people are starting to realize that maybe you're not getting the bang for the buck in those, that, you know, when you look at your budget and you look at how much you're contributing to certain players, and especially if you look at guys on the back half of their career and the back half of those deals, people are maybe a little more cognizant of that than they were some number of years ago.
Jerry, it's fascinating in that the Robbie Cano, for you, Nelson Cruz, and those are guys who are performing, at full value, basically. Of course, Cano's got a long way to go on that, but what is, do you think, the future of the big free agent name that comes out on the market? What's going to happen over the next couple of years?
I really don't think the market's going to change substantially, other than perhaps looking a little closer at the player's age in the first year of the long contracts. But with guys that are coming down the road, guys like Manny Machado and Bryce Harper and eventually Mike Trout, these guys will get paid, and justifiably so. They're great players. They deserve to get paid. We understand from a front office perspective when we go into these contracts that you're probably going to have to live with some kind of underperformance on the back end to get it up front. But at the end of the day, if you're talking about a free agent who's in his late 20s, you're talking about a different dynamic, because now you're buying a number of prime years in free agency, and I do believe that those players will still get paid. Right now, we look at Robbie Cano. Robbie Cano, just from a WAR perspective, the return on his contract, it's gonna roughly be house money on the back end of his contract that we're playing on. You just have to understand that when you get there.
Yet we've seen front-loaded contracts now. J.D. Martinez, Eric Hosmer, both front-loaded and then having opt-outs. Dusty, again, if you're put yourself in the mind of a player where it's like, wait a second, that is a lot of money on the front end. I'm not getting the years, perhaps. Do you think that's something that players will like?
Exactly. I mean, I think it's to the player's benefit, with the opt-out, especially if they feel that they're on top of their game and they have a chance to get, more money later. You can get your money now and possibly get your money later. It's just that the way I was raised by my dad, if you sign a contract, there ain't no opt-out. That's not really a contract. And so if you sign a contract, in my eyes, the players probably won't like it, but a contract is a contract.
Do you think that could? What's the future of that? That seems to make sense for a team as well, right? Or where are you on that, Brandon?
Well, I think we'll see more and more front-loaded contracts, and the reason why, to Jerry's point again, is that decision makers want to correlate earnings to production, and a lot of really good players are maturing into free agency at age 29, 30, 31. So it makes sense that you would want to pay players more when they're good and less when they're, suffering the effect of aging down the road. We had a contract like that with Scott Feldman a few years back. We did it recently with Yuli, and we try to keep it in mind. And it's an easy thing to do because players prefer, of course, to be paid up front as well. I mean, that goes to the time value of money and all that. They want money now to go invest. So there's, I think, an opportunity there where players and clubs see things the same way. Players want more money up front, and general managers want flexibility down the road to be able to add to their team without suffering the drawback of having players being overpaid based on their current level of production.
How much of this, Jerry, start with you, again, as a former player and now a general manager, how much of it is baseball ops winning the room?
I don't necessarily think it's baseball ops winning the room. I think if baseball ops had their druthers, you'd never do an opt-out in a contract. Yeah, truly. But like Brandon suggested, and I think along the lines with Dusty, me as a player, I would have loved to have the opt-out in a contract. As a general manager, I'd rather beat my head against a wall. But it is part of the game today. And I do think that in order to achieve the best player pool, you're going to have to ultimately walk that line, front-load a contract or provide opt-outs. I don't think baseball operations is there to dominate the room or to win the war, but that's how we're being assessed. 30 groups now are being assessed through a different and maybe a more acute lens than we've ever been assessed before, and every one of the 30 groups is aware of that. So our actions and the way we sign, the way we acquire players is often affected by third parties through which we have no control because of our own egos. That's just real.
But I'll stay with you, because you're running the room, right? So has the dynamic changed in the last 5 years, 10 years?
More inclusive than it was when I first started as an executive, and certainly I think more inclusive than it was during my playing days. But the room gets bigger and bigger, and we're more reliant on more and more departments with smarter and smarter people. And we are looking for the edge. We're looking for that next idea that's going to help us separate ourselves from the other 29. Because at the end of the day, if we all do things the same way, it's going to come down to who has the largest pool of money to work with. And then generally speaking, I think we both lose.
How does the room work with the Astros?
Jeff, I think, treats things the same way. He wants various perspectives in the room, and so we'll have representation from player development, scouting, analytics, and all that. And we have tools that now synthesize or combine input from all those groups into predictive models so that we can rely less on visceral opinion. And we have, predictive models that use scouting input and field staff opinions and what we get in the analytics space from past performance and all these new big data technologies. So we're definitely model-driven and data-driven, but we make sure that when we get the results of that model, we're talking about it as an inclusive group and that we have voices from various perspectives.
Dusty, again, you were on the receiving end of that. How did you see things change as far as what you received, either scouting, advanced scouting, analytic sheets, or discussions? How had that changed the last few years?
Well, it's changed a lot. I mean, since I first started managing back in 1993, I mean, I had to call to the minor leagues. I had to call, say a player gets called up, we don't know him. I had to call down and say, hey, do you know this guy? And then, because you hate to be throwing a guy down and he's a low ball hitter. And so you try to find out as much information as you could, about that player. And also you try to find out as much information as you could about the opposing teams, who's hurt, who's not, who's hot, who's cold. Back then we had to use, their daily sheets that they put out. And so I had to tell our people to quit putting so much information because they might be using the same information, that I'm using. And so we're always looking for an edge. And, a lot of people have said Dusty's not into analytics. Well, I was in analytics years ago. It just didn't have a name for it. We were always into left-right matchup. We were always into who bets what in players in scoring position, who hits better in the 7th, 8th, and 9th down the stretch. We're also who's double play prone on our team and their team, who's prone to the strikeout. So you try not to put too many of those same guys back to back in the order. So we were always, and on the pitching side, I was always big because I always had a cheat sheet since the day that I started managing in '93. I always had a cheat sheet about, say, my relievers. It was important to me who inherited runners, who gives up somebody else's runs, first batter efficiency, all those kind of things. And what sabermetrics has done for me, it's allowed me to ask questions so I don't have to do all the research on my own, because nowadays everything's at your disposal. You just have to research it, find it. Our guys mine the information, and then I decipher it, me and my staff. We meet with the pitchers, the catchers, different players, and my pitching coach. These guys put in unheralded hours, unbelievable to how it used to be. And so now these guys are getting there at 11:30, where we used to show up at 1, 2 o'clock. So it's really helped out. But the key thing is that you have to have the players. That's number one. You have to have the players to enact whatever you're trying to do.
Would you have meetings? Would the baseball ops guys meet with you? Or
Yes.
Yeah, so how would that work? Tell us.
Oh, yeah. Well, we don't meet. Well, they're there every day in the clubhouse, off the coach's room. Say we start a series on Monday, and they would be in there on Monday. We'd go over things. I'd say, hey, okay, I want to know managers' tendencies. I want to know what a guy likes to do and this and that. And these guys would give their opinions, and then and we welcome their opinions. And then to me, it appears that sometime in modern America, people think that disagreement is being disloyal, but I think disagreement's very healthy, because that gives me a different view and a different outlook on how to look at things.
Patrick, how have you seen the information getting to the decision makers?
Yeah, the one thing I was thinking when you talk about the voice in the room and whatnot, we've been working with the commissioner's office for about 20 years or so, and for the first 10 or so years, there wasn't really an appetite for the clubs to really integrate a bunch of information. And then we've seen a drastic change on that. Not only have we done work with clubs, but the staffs at the clubs we're working with has grown, drastically, right? It used to be like a one guy at the club, and we would work on a system, and it would have some scouting reports, and that was it. now there's a huge staff of guys at the clubs pulling analytics, getting information, and that's also that they can collaborate and make their best decisions. So that's a big change just even in the last 5 years or so, the size of staffs that the clubs have put on that, that the ones that we work with, the size of the folks that we're working with there, and the amount of information we're putting in those systems, and that's all so that they can work together and make their best baseball decisions.
Right. Go ahead, Dustin.
And see, Brian, I think the best clubs combine analytics and scouting together, because I don't think you can really do a true job just using one. I think you have to use both. I mean, which is case in point, the last couple of years, I always notice at the end of the year, there are only 12 teams that have winning records out of 30 teams in baseball. So something's missing. And so I don't know if they're missing scouting, or I don't know if they're missing analytics, but we have to do something to have better parity in baseball, because 12 teams is certainly not enough. And that was one of my goals, to have my team be one of the 12.
Right, and they were. How is that integrated then? What's the integration between, Brendan, your scouts and your baseball ops people?
Well, we value really good scouts and we value good analysts, and I agree with Dusty. We had a reputation in the early going, I think, for not valuing scouts and player development staff members, but I think that's changed in recent time. And our goal is to allow analytics to deliver value to scouts and to field staff members, and we try to build powerful feedback tools and other models and measures that help our coaches and help our scouts do a better job. So that's our operating model, is instead of viewing analysts and scouts as separate entities and allowing a general manager to see two different perspectives and weigh those perspectives in his mind, what we do is we try to have analytics be very end-user centric and constantly develop tools for our scouts and for our field staff members.
Okay. Jerry, how about you? How do you try to get those worlds together?
We actually mix them. Like Dusty was saying, I will coach the group. Every decision we make is going to have a 51-49 split, and sometimes the analyst is going to win out, and sometimes the scout is going to win out. And we set up educational programs for our scouts where it's no longer you're going to tolerate the information, you're going to learn why it's applicable in each situation. And vice versa. So, the analyst always thinks he's right because the data supports his decision. The scout always thinks he's right.
No comment.
The scout always thinks he's right because he's seen it and that's what he believes. Now, we have to make a decision based on those two. And so many different factors affect a decision. And it could be a roster fit. It could be the makeup of the player. It could be medical that we're not aware of from either an analytic or scouting perspective. Each one of those is critically important to making a decision, and we want all of our people to be aware of how each decision is made. And therefore, we tend to blend them. We'll have conference calls between our analysts and our scouts so that they are in tune with what the other thinks. When we send in prep lists from a scouting list, we'll make sure that the analysts comb through it, and they will directly call the scouts and provide them feedback for things they're seeing, and it effectively just trigger a conversation because you might come up with a better answer.
How different is that from 10 years ago, Jerry?
Incredibly different. 10 years ago, you just used to sit across the table and throw fruit at each other when you didn't agree. Now it is a bigger, more inclusive group, and front offices are getting more powerful and smarter with each passing year, and you're willing to use that next measure, whatever it is, and you're willing to try something that may have an inherent degree of risk to try to find the advantage. Otherwise, you're going to fail unless you're willing to take risk in that area.
Yeah, it seems as though as we get into the Statcast era and we get into the whole new wave of analytics, it's very player-centric. It's very scouty. Patrick, let me start with you, with what we're seeing before we get to what players, as far as devouring this information and kind of reverse engineering their game in a lot of ways.
You're saying in terms of what the player's looking at?
Players, like, how are they devouring this information?
Yeah, I think the incredible thing that you never heard even a few years ago was players talking about what my exit velocity is and launch angle is, and making changes to their swing to accommodate that because they can see the metrics that was never available to them. And so, like, you look at what Statcast has done to basically make that visible to the player, and they can see tangible effects of maybe slight tweaks. And that's something, that's clearly brand new and didn't exist. And from a team side, you want to make sure you're bringing in all the information to support that, not only for your front office decision makers, but for your guys on the field, for their training sessions to make the most of that.
Dusty, tell us about Daniel Murphy then. Was that something he did on his own as far as
Well,
getting launch angle, or was that something
I
that came
think
up
that's
with?
something that Daniel acquired when he was with the Mets. And I hear him talking about, the 8 zones here to do this and do that, and he's so happy when he hits the ball in the air. But whenever he really wants to hit, he hits it on the ground left field. But Daniel Murphy has really, he's a rare player. Because, see, everybody can't do what Daniel Murphy has done and succeeded at. It's hard enough to hit the ball in the first place. Personally, I couldn't do it because I was in the Ted Williams school of hitting, where a slight upswing just meant I was making a lot of outs in the air. And so I didn't like making outs. And so, but everybody, you have to have the ability and the aptitude in order to apply, some of these things. I think the younger players, if they have ability, they need to just try to figure out how to center the ball. And, the thing that I like about the Statcast, the most is not the offensive side of it. I really like the defensive side of it, because that's what I saw really, really works, because you have enough data to, in the bank to do these shifts. At first, I wasn't for the shifts. But then the more that I saw these guys hitting into the shifts, the more I was for it, and the more the pitchers were for it. Because, see, at first they were not for it, because they wouldn't count the balls up the middle that were caught. They'd only count the balls that dribbled through the left side. But a lot of that has to do with them having to throw a ball where they want to throw it. And that's the thing about the shifts that I noticed. Now, the Atlanta Braves back in the day, I was always trying to figure out how Andrew Jones was taking off running to right center field before Maddox even pitched. And that's because when Maddox wanted the ball outside, it was outside. But you can't do that with a guy that doesn't have, pinpoint control. So I think it starts, with the players first, and then it goes, to what their degree of, what ability that they have, because everybody doesn't have the same ability.
Brendan, how active are players now in getting after that information?
Much more so than 5 years ago when I first started. I feel like everything's kind of come full circle, because analytics used to be about taking past performance to predict future performance, but now you have all these big data technologies, Statcast, TrackMan, bat sensors, and it's allowing, I think, analysts, scouts, players to all understand baseball in the same language. Doesn't matter how many home runs you hit last year and what that means for future home run production. Now we have measurements of swing quality, of pitch quality, of velocity. The language that scouts have been using for decades is now relatable to analysts and scouts and players alike. So it gives us a common basis for conversation. I actually find that scouts and analysts are much more unified because of that now.
If you're even looking at, say, George Springer, you're wondering how is he going to perform in center field? You moved him from right to center. What were you looking at between your scouts and your quants, whatever, and figuring out, will he be good there?
It's a really good question. I think for every player and question about his positional eligibility is a little bit different. But for Springer, we have the Statcast data, like Dusty was mentioning, and we look at that. But we also rely a lot on our scouts, who have really good feel for that sort of stuff, having watched players make transitions from position to position over the years.
His defensive runs saved, here's a random question, his defensive runs saved were very positive in center, negative in right. Why would that be?
I don't have a great answer for that. I know center fielders typically have more opportunity to accrue win value in center field because they have more opportunity to make great plays. They have more balls hit to them. So that could be something to do with it. But the other thing is that those DRS and UZR metrics are not completely reliable all the time, and sometimes they kind of pump out some funky numbers. So George Springer's a really good right fielder. He's a really good center fielder. I can't say specifically why he had a bad rating in right field.
We had bad metrics. That's what I would say. It wasn't always bad. He had bad metrics, and there could be things. What
Brian,
do you guys,
Brian, I think some of that might have been at center field. You see the bat go through the plane, over the bat path, and you can see with the ball. If you're swinging and the ball's and you're hitting this way, the ball's going to go this way, and if you're out hooking, it's going to go that way. Well, see, a lot of times you can't see that, from the corners, but you can see that from center field. Personally, if I was to build an outfielder and not using Statcast or anything, I would have my center fielder right or left-handed thrower, but I definitely have a right-handed throwing right fielder and a left-handed throwing left fielder. And to me, I played them all, and to me, left field is the hardest one to play because everybody can hit the ball to left field, and very rarely is it going straight. So therefore, if I had a left-handed throwing left fielder, everything's going to the forehand basically, and and right field, everything's going to my forehand as a right-hander, as a right-handed thrower. So therefore, I guess the moral of my story is that the backhand is more difficult than the forehand.
Is more difficult.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. By the way, speaking of center field, you have a second baseman going to play center field, D. Gordon, right? How do you make the decision, yes, he can do that?
Throw it against the wall. No, I think the real
Brilliant.
the real answer is we're dealing with a premium athlete who has played middle positions, whether shortstop or second base, his entire career. And you know, the decision makers for us, we're looking at Statcast information. We did create our own overlay based on some of our data, what we thought D. Gordon would look like in center field. So center field for us, it's a critical position, but when you're, like Dusty alluded to, when you're used to playing in the middle, when you're used to seeing that same bat path, and you are what we would consider on our scale an 80 runner who has incredible first step quickness, and when he's wide open is among the 3 best runners in the league and covering big ground, it seems like it should match up. And then take it to the makeup element, you know, the character, work ethic, application that needs to occur. You know, D. Gordon was born into baseball. He's always been a baseball guy. He's the consummate baseball rat. And my first instinct after watching him run around out there for a week is not only is he going to successfully convert to center field, but he'll be excellent out there. And I don't think it's going to take any time at all. And all of the data pointed toward this is a good experiment that should turn out well. And right now, visually, it sure appears that way.
Yeah, that was similar to, I remember when Robin Yount, when they moved him to center field from shortstop. And they say if you can play shortstop, you can play almost anywhere on the field. A la Billy Hamilton, because he was, I'm sure you probably use that as an example, at the same time with the Cincinnati Reds, he was a shortstop. But the one thing that you have to be careful with is how strong does he stay throughout the course of the year, because he's doing a lot of running out there. And that's why I always respected offensive players, you know, that played center field. You know, Willie Mays and these guys that played center field and carried a lot of their offensive load, but they would invariably, come August and September, you got to kind of watch them.
Patrick, it makes me think, because there's a lot of things, even just, again, Dusty got very baseball-y there, right? But it's true. Like, how are your optics? How are you tracking the ball? How are you seeing? How comfortable are you? Right, you said he's a baseball lifer. Like, what's your adaptability? Do we get to a point where we can measure some of these? Because I'm agreeing with you, you're right, but can we get to a point where we measure some of these things?
That I don't really have an answer for. I mean, I wouldn't think you can. I mean, I think these things go beyond a lot of what you can measure. I mean, you can use a lot of that baseball knowledge to do things like your view from the field and use that to study guys and look for example guys that you can apply to someone you're thinking about doing a sample with. So I think you can do that. But when you talk about a per person basis, then you're back to the old scouting report, like you were talking about, what's the guy's makeup? But we know he's going to do the work it takes to make this happen or not. And I think that goes beyond the data you can pull. The one thing you mentioned there, though, which is interesting when you talk about these guys, which has changed, I think, a lot more recently, is, you know, what the fatigue factor and pitch counts and things, keeping guys healthy is almost as important as some of this other stuff there. And there's been a lot more attention paid to that than even just a few years ago now.
All right, here's another topic. Eric Hosmer is, I think, a fascinating case in that his numbers are good, numbers are not great. He seems to be a part of winning an awful lot, right? So, Dusty, we'll start with you. Like, what could be slipping through the numbers that a player, if Hosmer or players like Hosmer bring that don't quite get quantified? What are we missing?
Some of the things like baseball instinct, his knowledge of the game, his knowledge of people, when to speak up as a leader. You know, I mean, these are intangibles sometimes that I don't know if they can be quantified or not, but see, there's certain guys on your team that guys look for to be leaders. And it's not always your best player. A lot of times people think your best player should be your leader, but it's the person that people want to follow. That's why I never had a team captain, because my version of a captain might be different than another player's, because hey, I'm not following him. And see, that's big in the clubhouse. The dynamics of the clubhouse and on the field is similar to a family dynamic.
All right, guys, Hosmer, or players like Hosmer in trying to figure out, okay, he's never slugged 500, but what's beyond the numbers?
I agree with Dusty 100%. Baseball analytics is never going to get to the point where it can quantify those things. I think to an extent, if a guy has a good makeup, it's probably reflected some in his past performance, and so it's there a little bit, but not fully. And I think that analysts like me need to remain humble and realize that there's a lot missing from projection systems and from all these metrics we're getting from big data. And I remember, we dropped 3 straight in the ALCS against the Yankees, and it was the worst feeling in the world. Everyone's head was down, but we had guys like Springer and Bregman who were peppy and optimistic and cheering up, the entire clubhouse. And I don't know what that's worth, but I know it's real and it has an impact on the mojo of the team. So we'll never get there. We'll never be able to measure it all. Maybe some of the stuff. I mean, you asked about reaction time and visual acuity and right field versus center field and stuff like that. Like, technologies will allow us to understand those things better and better, but there's always going to be a piece of the pie that's missing.
Jerry, with all the deals you make, how deeply do you look at some of the soft factors after the hard quantifiable things?
Every single transaction. Because to that, I was thinking about this when Dusty spoke, the profound words of John Wetland, that's probably the first time, maybe the last you've ever heard those words together. But the profound words of John Wetland back in the playing days, 1994 Montreal Expos, after he had left and was ready to join the New York Yankees for what was to be a championship run there. Wet, on the way out the door, said, every team has a heart and a soul and a conscience. Sometimes it's one person, and sometimes it's embodied by a lot of different people. And he was referencing that Expos team had a lot of different leaders. We have, to me, one of the great players that I've been associated with in almost 7 years now as a general manager is David Freese. David Freese has always been associated with winning teams, is probably not going to go down as a Hall of Fame player, appeared in an all-star game once upon a time, but doesn't come off your tongue as that kind of impact, but he's a leader. And he brings people together in a clubhouse. And when you're going through 162 games where you're going to have incredible highs and lows, that is invaluable to a team, to have somebody who can center it. And there is no number you can put on it. There is nothing. But when you've been around baseball who has those qualities, and they're incredibly important. And I could cite 20 other players through my lifetime that I've come across with those traits, and they're critically important to winning.
That was deep. Wetland said that as he was.
He did.
That's something.
Pretty smart.
All right, we have a few minutes left, so we're going to take some of the questions. A lot of these questions came from Twitter and hopefully from a lot of people right here. This is interesting, along the lines of Hosmer to the Padres. Do rebuilding teams have incentive to sign big free agents? And if so, what value do they bring to rebuilding teams? Brendan, you did a drastic rebuild. Is there wisdom to buying in on the free agent market while you're, say, a 90-loss team?
Yes, I think there is, because you can't take that next step unless you have the leadership that you need in the clubhouse. So it's a meticulous balance, I think, with building up team chemistry and your roster the right way. But I think about some of the veterans that Jeff brought in over the course of time, and I have no doubt that we would not have made it at this point had it not been this kind of iterative process throughout the year where we're adding and adding to the clubhouse makeup and bringing veterans aboard. So, bringing a $150 million player into a struggling team, I mean, that's an extreme example, but in general, definitely think that it's important to have veterans around and good clubhouse guys around.
What do we think of that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's similar to like when the Nationals signed, Jason Worth. One of the reasons they signed Jason Worth was to attract other free agents. And see, sometimes you can attract other free agents, or you have young players around. I always liked a team that was a combination of young players with youth and silliness and exuberance, and with the experience of the older players to teach them how to play. Because see, as a player, as a coach, I can tell you how to play, but as a player, I can tell you how to play and then show you how to play. And that was invaluable to me in my young career, and I've tried to pass that on to my players.
Yeah, that's not the normal economic model now, Jerry, right? So you're rebuilding and then you put your foot on the accelerator somewhere along the path. What about buying when you're actually down toward the bottom?
I think most teams that are down toward the bottom want to watch their young players play. They want to provide them with the repetition that allow them to grow. But there does come a point, Dusty mentioned earlier the Atlanta Braves in the 90s. does come a point where your John Smoltz and your Chipper Jones, or maybe a little pre-advance of that, your David Justice, your Ron Gant, your Tom Glavine, need a Terry Pendleton. They need the Fred McGriff, not just to help get them over the hump in terms of productivity in the middle of the lineup, but in order to teach those young guys how to take that next step toward winning. And there is a nuance to winning. Some of the highest performing teams in our lifetime don't always win. And you know, there's sometimes that personality in the room that really helps turn that dial, and you can't really take that. Eric Hosmer embodies that. Everybody who's played with him alludes to the same things, and he may not line up necessarily with Joey Votto, but he brings elements to the table that help teams win.
Here's a good question. What about analytics when scouting internationally? Are stats projectable, or is this an area mostly for old school scouts? Who wants to take that?
Are we talking about professional players?
Scouting internationally, so I guess not.
Yeah.
Or what can be measured now out on the field? Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough challenge anyway if you talk about international, assuming non-pro international, but even like high school level can be so hit or miss, right? So that's something we know that a lot of the teams we work with struggle with. We struggle with trying to put any value on any numbers there. So I think a lot of times you do tend up relying on the old write-up of the scouting, and you infer what you can from it, but it's very difficult because you don't have a sample size to work with. So I think that's where you want to get video on guys. That's why video becomes more important on these young guys. You want to surface that video so at least you can do video comparisons. So I think that's a shift there instead of trying to mine stats that aren't going to give you much bang for the buck.
What have you found in your experience?
Well, I think, you know, the hard part is when you're projecting what a young player may do, and especially when you're scouting against, in Latin America, where you're signing 16, 17-year-olds that you have to sort of fatten them up, so to speak, you know, nutritionally, you know, before they can be strong and be productive. That's generally not my area, but I'm sure Jerry has seen that. You know, when you guys sign these young kids at a young age, and then right away you have to kind of project what he's going to be like as a man, his shoe size, his shoulder size. Am I right? It's kind of.
Oh, it's incredible. The data that we tend to run through now is more relative toward athleticism and health, more like biostatistical data of where the player is in his growth rather than where he is as a baseball player, because it's. You know, at Latin America, for the 16, 17-year-old, the young player, it's pure R&D. Spend as much as you can on upside. If you're trying to figure out how to analyze what they're doing, you're crazy. You know, Japan, the KBO, there is a translation that occurs. Unfortunately, I don't think that there is a lot of carryover in a statistic, but as a general rule, like in college baseball, like at the minor league levels and in the NPB, when a player dominates his level at the appropriate age, it deserves to be noted. And now you need to talk about how much of that is able to translate to our league.
Well, this is our 3 more minutes here. This is fascinating. Now, how much, that's the thing, is actual baseball success are you looking at, or how much are you looking at velocity, exit velocity? You know, tools. Still, like where are we on any of that? In like measuring, this guy's had success, there's a reason for it, or this guy has the body, smokes the ball, throws real hard. Where are we on that?
I think let's jump in real here. I think the good rule of thumb is the further away you are from the major league level, the more that you have to rely on the kind of biometrics that Jerry was alluding to, the more you have to rely on scouting opinion. There are projection systems and equivalencies for players that come from NPB and KBO, but when you're talking about a 16 or 17-year-old Dominican player that you're scouting based on no sample size, you're not relying on any of that sort of information because it doesn't exist. So the closer you get to the major league level, I think there's more available. I think probably every team in baseball has a draft model now that's able to roughly project what a player is going to do when he's coming out of a top D1 program, but it's harder for high school kids, and it's even harder for players that are coming out of the international space.
Same question. What do you think? I mean, because you'll see, I'm sure you've thought, Dusty, many times, all right, that guy doesn't hit as hard, he's not as fast, he knows how to play. Right? But you also know you played Major League Baseball. There's a certain genetic component to being able to operate out there. Where are you?
Yeah, there are certain things that I can tell, you know, with my eyes or with my ears. You know, I can tell one year, like Rich Aurelia, when he was playing for me, you know, they didn't think that he was going to be a big league shortstop, but I could hear the difference in the sound coming off his bat. And I said, this guy's getting stronger. And they said, well, he's never hit more than 10 home runs. And I was like, well, If he plays every day, he can hit that fastball. And I bat him in front of Barry. He'll get a lot of fastballs, and he end up hitting 35. So it's a situation where it's like picking out a dog out of a litter. I don't know how many hunters are out here, if this makes any sense.
Hunters.
But you pick a dog out of a litter, and you see which one has big feet, which one has big shoulders, and you project on what he might be when he's grown. And a lot of times, I've been right, and a few times I've been wrong.
Where we found, because we measure a lot more now, right? And that's bringing, scouting seems to be going, what's sexy? And it's velocity, exit velocity, right?
Yeah, and those are, I mean, the advantage there, of course, are those things you can measure at any age. But yeah, and so that's something you can try to translate, something you can try to capture. And I think that's something when you're at the lower levels or international stuff, you're trying to collect that information, trying to do general biometric stuff. Like I said, video is a powerful thing because then at least people can see, your one guy in the office can see guys from all over the world. It's not the best thing ever, but you got to work with what you have.
Okay. Brandon, before we go, what's one thing the Astros are doing that we don't know about?
Well, I've got a very talented rival general manager put away from me, so I'll probably keep that secret. But,
Come on, man.
but
It's just us.
I'll say generally that big data, like it's affecting every other industry, it's affecting baseball also, and there's a whole bunch of physiological monitors and sensors that are changing the way we can understand baseball. And to my point earlier, really unifying the analyst and scouting communities.
How much, Jerry, is there an information war? Or you kind of all know the same stuff, or do you say, what are they doing? Like, how much of that is operating now?
Oh, no, I want to know what they're doing.
Right.
To a degree, we're all pulling from the same pool of information. You're trying to generate your own. We have, most recently, we're diving into the pool of biostatistical research. We're trying to understand better how our players' bodies work, how to keep them healthier, how to maximize their time on the field, and how to help them recover quicker than they have before. And that is an analytic tool if used properly. We now have a director of high performance who by trade is a biostatistical analyst, and that's what she does. And I never thought in my baseball lifetime I would see the day where a biostatistical analyst would walk into a manager's office every morning and tell him who could and couldn't play that day. Right. And the manager say, okay.
Right.
But that's the bridge we cross.
And then the player comes in and says, yes,
and says, what the heck? But I think whether it's understanding the threat of understanding present injury, the threat of future injury, and how to maximize your best player's time on the field, that's the next big thing in baseball. It is really, in my opinion, it has really been throughout the world of sport. Australian rules football, European soccer, the world of sport has already embraced these things. Baseball's been a little slow, like we sometimes are, and but now we're embracing it. And as Brandon said, there's 30 teams that are all in some way doing this. We're one of them, and I do think it's the next great frontier in how we use intelligence to change what we're doing on the field.
All right. Well,
In a positive way.
This went quickly. I enjoyed it immensely.
Me
Dusty
too.
Baker,
Thank
Patrick Young, Brendan Taubman, Jerry DiPoto. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it.